All right, everybody, welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. I am your host, AJ Armstrong. You can follow me on Instagram at AaronArmstrong33, or you can always go to my website, AaronJArmstrong.com. This is the podcast Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews. Winners, we feature people leading their industry in various walks of life. Wallets, we talk about personal finance, we talk about real estate, we talk about the investment world and entrepreneurship. And worldviews. We talk about some of these guiding values and principles that shape the behaviors of some of these incredible individuals, as well as some things that I learned on my own journey. And today we had a very special guest that, it's just crazy how you bump into these people sometime. And you guys know that I pull a lot of contacts from my West Point network, as well as my West Point real estate network. And this specific individual, his name is Ludwig Diaz. And Mr. Diaz is really an investment professional, Army veteran, real estate expert, and he's an entrepreneur. He spent over 15 years in the backside of corporate finance. He was the one evaluating all these different real estate deals and making the recommendations and underwriting for the decision to go forward with financing. So he was an investment banker for many years, worked in Wall Street, and he worked in London. He's got deep industry experience in real estate, hospitality, leisure, gaming, in the US and Europe, experience across all aspects of corporate financing, strategy, mergers, acquisitions. He's obtained over 70 mandated client engagements at a global investment bank. He's got a range of deal experience that encompasses acquisitions, asset and company level financing, private public equity capital raising, including IPO work, strategy reviews, sales and recapitalizations. And all of this has amounted to over $25 billion, guys. That's with a B, of successfully closed transactions. He is really a jack of all trades, but what was really interesting is he's got such a deep knowledge of real estate investment banking. However, he's pushed that into his own personal businesses, his own entrepreneur journey. But what we really dug into were some of the values that he brings out in his life and some of the ways he thinks about how where he puts his time, where he puts his money, and how that looks. So you guys, I think, will really appreciate his success tactics and topics and tactics. But you guys have to understand he is, one of the best known people in my network when it comes to the side of investment banking, evaluating a real estate deal, and really an incredible individual, a great man, a former West Point grad like myself. So I really hope you guys enjoy the show today. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you
how to be somebody.
Where in your life did you learn that you're not good enough?
Take what you're most passionate about and what you're most fearful of, and what is the plan to overcome that fear, and what is the plan to enact that passion.
All right, everybody, welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews. I am your host, AJ Armstrong. You can follow me on Instagram at AaronArmstrong33, or you can go to my website at AaronJArmstrong.com. Joining me today is a good friend and fellow West Point graduate, Ludwig Diaz, who is an investment banker who turned into real estate investor and really has a pretty impressive career among many different entrepreneurial aspects. And we're going to have a really exciting conversation surrounding a lot of things that we've talked about on this show, time, energy, money. What is the relationship between those, and what is the relationship between corporate and entrepreneur, and how can we, as business leaders, start to blur that line and really just start making great business decisions in general. So, Mr. Diaz, thank you for jumping on today.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is really a treat. When we were talking before a couple weeks ago, and I think you have a great way of articulating ideas that I thought about, but you've done them in your life. You know what I mean? When it comes to like valuing your time, when it comes to how can you build wealth? How can you build wealth efficiently? These are things people don't think about. And there's like this community of entrepreneurs and motivators is just like run your head through the wall until you get to success. And I think you have a much more clever way of looking at the world.
Oh no, I think you're giving me too much credit, because I thought the exact same way from day one, and it's taken me a long time to take a step back and realize, well, look, there's got to be a better way. there's got to be a more efficient way to go about this, because you can really work yourself to death if you're in the unstructured environment that entrepreneurship puts you in. um, you really have to be efficient, or you're not going to hit your targets.
Tell me a little bit about, we'll get into a little bit of your background and stuff, but because we just jumped into it, like tell me a little bit about how you come up with that structure. Like do you set a schedule for yourself? How are you coming up with a way of constraining the wildness of entrepreneurship?
Well, it took me a little while to get a system that worked for me, and that's an important component because it's different for everybody. We all have different personalities. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. Even the times of the day in which we're the most effective vary depending on who we are.
Yes,
Some people are morning; they're really good early in the morning.
that's me,
Others
right?
are night owls, right? And then you have your life situation that maybe requires you to be active in other affairs during your most productive hours. And so you just have to find a way to balance through that. And so um, I really took it back to some of the fundamentals of, all right, we really have to be goal oriented here. And the way I do it now is at the end of every year, it's time for celebration, hopefully, with friends and family. And as we start into the new year, I spend the first week, the last week of the current year, the first week of the next year, just going through, what do I want to do this coming year? And I try to make really difficult objectives that I'd be incredibly proud of if I could actually achieve them. If I fall short, it's okay because they're stretch goals. And I try to get a good 3 areas that I want to really hit over the course of the year. And this is the big picture target. And then I sequentially build up to it and say, okay, in order to hit that, that means that I first am going to have quarterly goals. And those quarterly goals are going to lead me on a path to achieve whatever that big picture goal is for the year. And then I set up monthly goals. In order to hit the first target for quarter one, I have to do this in January, I have to do this in February, I have to do this in March. And sometimes I keep it open because it's difficult to define where I'm going to be 2 months from now. Sometimes I'm very granular about it, and I say, okay, well, month one, in order to get this step of the way towards my goal, I'm going to have to do these 3 things or these 4 things. And maybe that's something where one of them is going to take me 2 weeks. One of them is going to take me a few days. I call it a week. Another one's going to take another week. And I can get as detailed as I want, or I can give myself a little flexibility if there's a lot of things, a lot of balls that I'm juggling. But I find that if I set it up this way, whatever I do each week and whatever I do each day is working towards achieving whatever that next step of the journey is towards getting that big goal for the year.
Do you do that all the way down to like a decision level? Like, I mean, when you're thinking about how do I make a decision in the moment, or I might have several opportunities in front of me, are you even looking at it at that level too? Like always tying it back to that goal?
Well, in a way, well, there's a difference between tactically on the ground and um,
And the
the,
strategy of
the
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 entire
thought
year.
process that I'm trying to go through here. And the in a way, yes, because every morning, if I start the morning off right, I have a really productive day. And I take 5 or 10 minutes to go through some exercises you've probably heard, visualizing, going through, these are my big picture goals for the year. I see myself achieving them. And I remind myself, this is what I need to hit. And what I'm doing that day or what I'm doing that week is, as long as it's tangentially related to that, that's excellent. And by reminding myself every morning, okay, if I do this one thing today, it's a great outcome. Or
Sure.
if I get through this week, which is really, really aggressive and painful and it sucks, but if I get through that, that's going to be a huge win. And it's not going to accomplish my goal, but I know I'm going in the right direction. By reminding myself of that daily, then when distractions come along, or when I have to make a choice, well, I really would love to do activity B, but activity B is not taking me in the right direction. Can I afford to do that? Well, I make that decision then. Because sometimes, there's a lot of things that we do that we really want to do, and they're not necessarily going to accomplish a big goal, but that's life. You have to live, you have to enjoy yourself, or you have to do things that are maybe taking a step to the side. I'm not saying don't live your life, but I am
You could
very
take
deliberate.
detours, right? You could take detours.
You can,
Yeah.
but you also, so long as you're deliberate in your decision to do that, because you see what the bigger picture is, and you say, well, it's okay because I will make up for it this way, or I'm already ahead of where I thought I would be this month, or whatever the case is. If you take too many detours and you're not conscious about that, time slips by, and
Yeah.
that's where there's a risk.
Yeah, it's a really I completely agree with that approach. And actually, as I was listening to Jocko Willing interview Jordan Peterson on a podcast, and they were talking about like that science of motivation. That was kind of the topic of what keeps us motivated, and how some people just stay crazy motivated all the time. And what Jordan Peterson was kind of talking about was that if you can, a lot of people get excited about having that bigger goal, like you do your New Year's resolutions, or whenever you kind of do these annual or, several year out goals, you get really excited about what if I arrive there. And then the part a lot of people fail to do is like what you just described, break that into quarterly goals or into monthly goals or into some just tangible targets, because it's the recognition of progress in the direction of that goal that keeps feeding the motivation. Like if you wanted to lose weight or something, having a goal to lose 20 pounds and being able to break that into like 1 pound a week, seeing that difference on the scale is going to continue to feed that motivation to get you to continue to follow through. And I think that your approach is exactly the right way to look at that, because you're tying in that distant goal, what gets you excited, into the present, so you can kind of suck it up through these moments that are uncomfortable, or you're doing something you don't want to do, because you can see that you're still working towards that end state, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The ability to take time to recognize that you've accomplished something, even that daily activity that you said, look, it was a difficult day, but I did this, or I accomplished whatever it was for that day. That's a win, and
Right.
that's something that over time you energize yourself with that. You mentioned it. You hit the nail right on the head, because the the unfortunate thing is that by the time you do get to that big goal, if you don't have the next one to go after, this really surprised me. But if you don't have the day-to-day plan and the next step already prepared, you could hit an incredible accomplishment and then actually feel really down, because you said, oh, okay, well, I did this. Great, I celebrate, but now what? And
Right.
that's actually put me down a few times, because then I said, well, what am I going to do now? And uh, oh, I have these thoughts of, well, I failed. I should have done more. I should have done this. And no, you were winning every step of the way. And you have to recognize each of these little accomplishments, whether it's a day or a week or a month or a quarter, where you progressed on something, because that's the journey. You've heard that saying. I don't have the quote in mind, but it's really,
Yeah, life's
it's
about
really,
the journey, not the
yes,
destination, right?
exactly, exactly. And this is what you're doing. You're having all of these little skirmishes and battles, and eventually you'll win the war. But what you really accomplished over each one of these steps along the way, that's what builds up your confidence.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. In fact, like that's a very relevant example to both of us. I'm not sure if this happened to you when you graduated the academy, but like the whole 4 years you're at West Point, you're working towards graduating because it's very miserable and uncomfortable and it's challenging and everything that comes along with that experience. And then I remember on graduation day, it was just like people were crying and all this stuff, and I just didn't really even feel anything. It was just like another day to me. And I was like, what? This is supposed to be like the most euphoric, like best feeling of my life. I finally did it. I'm free, like, and here I am. And it's just like, just totally bland or whatever.
Yeah,
And it was just the weirdest thing. And I kind of like, regretted looking at how I couldn't have experienced that moment better. But to now, when I look back on it, and I try to like, practice mindfulness and gratitude and things like that, I'm just like, I graduated West Point, like I just kind of give that little I love me pat on the back. And I'm able to kind of relive what I missed on graduation day by like recognizing, wow, that was really something. Here we are connected. You're in New York, I'm assuming, right? And I'm over here in,
yep,
in the Midwest, and we're connecting because of that common thread. I'll be interviewing, $100 million investors at the Black and Gold Summit because of that. It's just like, it's just such a powerful network. And it's just like, now, if I don't take the time to recognize what I've done, you don't ever notice it. It just slips
that's right.
past you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why that regular reminder of what it is that you're setting out to do, focus, determination, you get it done one step at a time, you celebrate that step that you just made. And these are all building up not just your journey towards that ultimate outcome that you're trying to get to, but it's building up your confidence as an individual, knowing that you're you're getting it done. And that is something that it's very easy to forget if you don't take a moment to celebrate it, recognize it, and reinvigorate yourself to take on the next step. Because a lot of times, some of the, depending on how audacious your goals are, it's like climbing it's like climbing a mountain. You're going through one section of it, and it's extremely brutal, and you get tired, you get worn out, you lose self-confidence, you wonder what am I doing, and then you get through one leg of the journey, and you have a pause, and you can actually look out, look at the scenery, catch your breath. uh, if you don't take that moment to recognize, wow, I've actually made it up one quarter of this enormous mountain. It's a
Right.
huge obstacle, and I've done it. If you don't take that moment to recognize that, um, then the next leg of a journey, which is even harder, could really knock the wind out of you.
Yeah. And you might not even realize if it's worth it or not, right? Because you're not appreciating that kind of that intermittent success on the way up. It reminds me of what Tony Robbins talks about, where he says, uh, it's about the science of achievement and the art of fulfillment. And that's like one way of looking at it. It's like, yeah, there's you can hang out and you can look and you can have gratitude for a lot of those incredible things you've accomplished in the past. But then there's like this resting on your laurels. At some point, you want to get back in the fight and you want to continue to achieve. And it's like this unique balance of those two things to keep looking at, because like for example, my father, right? Like love the guy, one of my best friends, but he played football for the Wisconsin Badgers, which was the biggest thing. He played in college, and when he played, he was, like big shot, guy on campus or whatever. And then all of our stuff in our home to this day is like still all of his like college football stuff. He hangs it up, and like that's still something he's very proud of. But he never really had another fight since then. Like he never had that other thing that he could say he went out and did, that really he felt a ton of the same amount of pride and the same amount of accomplishment that came from that. He's done other things obviously in his life, but it's just not to that same level of pride that he had with it. And, I think he would have benefited from having that next crazy challenge. And it's just like, what is, like, what is that balance? You can look at your past, you can be grateful for those accomplishments, but at some level too, like you should strive for that next huge mountain to climb, right?
I think you absolutely have to, because like I mentioned before, once you once you hit the top, if you don't have the next goal lined up and the next leg of your journey already thought through, um, I- at least this is what I've experienced personally. Sometimes you end up pretty empty, and a lot of self doubt comes up and said, "Well, I could have done this or I could have done that," and so. Um, One of the natural reactions could be, well, look what I've accomplished. I'm really happy. I'm going to stay here. And you just live there. And that's something that happened in the past. And we're always growing. We're always evolving. The goalposts always are getting moved. So, I remember there was a time when I would dream about um, having a living in a certain place or having a certain type of income or having one of these things, and then I look back and I'm like, oh wow, um, uh, that was a small dream, but it was an appropriate dream because at the time I could only see so far, and if I didn't keep pushing, well, I'd hit that first hurdle, and you stay there. You stay there, and then something called complacency steps in, and you stop progressing, and that's a
Yeah.
choice. That's a choice.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, this dilemma goes just way back, right? The idea of Sisyphus, right? The Greek in Greek mythology was, Zeus had dealt him the eternal punishment of going down to Haiti and rolling a giant boulder all the way to the top of a mountain. But before he would get towards the top, the boulder would fall all the way back down. So he would never
Mm.
accomplish that rolling all the way up there. And that the idea of that, the moral of that story is that same thing. It's like at some level, there's a beauty to the accomplishment. In fact, like that's really the reward in a lot of ways. And so many people don't end up recognizing that accomplishment because they don't take the time to have those, reflections on their accomplishments, achievements, gratitude, and they end up just being bound to hell, just like Sisyphus, right? And it's kind of it's just it's a timeless dilemma that I think we run into. But before we jump into the next topic, I was just kind of curious, give the listeners a little bit, about your background, I guess, kind of what was your upbringing like into your academy, and then the first couple of years of your professional experience.
Yeah, sure. Um, my parents were first generation immigrants from the Dominican Republic, and uh, I was brought up in Queens, New York, where I still reside today, partly there and partly in the Dominican Republic. And my parents they had a small business. They pushed really hard on that, and their one uh, top priority for me was you need to study really hard, get good grades, and go to university. There's not that many people in my family who had done that, and so that was what I was indoctrinated with. Okay, you need to get good grades and go to college, and then you'll get a job, and then everything will be just fine. And so I studied really hard, and I had a couple of college admissions to pretty good schools. One of them was surprisingly West Point, and I I was thrilled with that. It was not only was it close to home, it's only an hour away from here, from where I was, but it was an opportunity to develop across multiple areas. And I was big into self development. I love sports. I was very
That
into
young, huh?
Yeah. I was into physical fitness. I was into trying to improve myself in a lot of areas. And I said, well, wow, if I can go to this to a couple of these other universities, and I'm sure it would have been a great outcome. But here I would be forced at the academy. I would be forced to develop in a whole bunch of different areas, whether I wanted to or not.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, let's give that a shot. And um, I had a lot of growing up to do there. It was not a very smooth 4 years for me. Let's put it that way. I was a century man by the
Hey,
time everything was said and done. That
I was a
meant
century man too. It's all good.
that means
For those of
I
you
was,
for those of you that don't
yeah.
know, a century man is at West Point. There's a punishment because like the whole experience is really a punishment. But one of the punishments is if you get in trouble, you have a little bit of time on the weekends for whatever personal reflection or homework. And they take the weekends away by having you march back and forth in this parking lot that's in between buildings where there's no view of anything for several hours on end until like the working day or the weekend is over, basically. So you get a certain amount of hours as a punishment, depending on whatever they think is the punishment is worth. And sometimes it could be several hundred. A century, right, would be 100 hours or more that you've walked back and forth. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, there's not even 100 hours in a day. How does that work? It's like, yes, this goes on for several weeks or even months at times to make sure you walk off all of your hours. But anyway, that's what we're talking about when we say he was a century man. It means he had over 100 hours, and I did too.
Yeah, I was not a model cadet in any way, shape, or form, and but somehow I made it through. I started to excel at the very end, and after graduating, I joined the engineer branch of the Army and went to Fort Bragg in an airborne unit, and I I had a wonderful time. I loved my time as a lieutenant, and it, I graduated in '98, and so um, we had 9/11, and then we had the enduring freedom situation in Afghanistan and in Iraqi freedom. Um, I was attached as an individual augmentee to Central Command in my last year there. I spent 5 years on active duty. In my last year, I was assigned there, and I said, "Oh my goodness! I mean, look at this! I other people are getting deployed, and I'm getting sent to Tampa, which is where Central Command was." And I said, "This is
The dream job, man."
well, I at the time I was really gung ho, and I was like, I just want to go and deploy and do my part, and but that's where I was assigned, and lo and behold, the entire or just about all of the headquarters element got forward deployed into the Middle East, and so I did have a bird's eye view to see what ground operations were taking place day by day in Afghanistan and in Iraq and basically the whole theater of operations, and saw and monitored the entire preparation and invasion of Iraq in 2003. And by the time my tour had ended and I was redeploying back, the that the second war had ended. Everyone was patting themselves on the back, said, "Oh wow, this was easy." And I signed out and I moved on. And several months later, we realized, well, actually, it wasn't that easy, and it devolved into the real battle, which lasted, still going on, lasted forever. But my time, those 5 years, that was the one bit of activity that I saw, and it was just at a headquarters element. But after the 5 year mark, I moved on, and at the time, I had originally had an Army scholarship to attend medical school, and that would have required me to sign up again for a good, I don't even remember at the time, it was probably 12 or 14 more years of active duty service. And that 2 months that I had off, it gave me some huge second thoughts. And I said, do I want to make a whole career of this, or I want to try other things? And I went for the latter, and I gave up that scholarship. I didn't sign up for more time on active duty, and I eventually I went back to graduate school and um,
Remind me again
realized
where you went for graduate school.
I went to Georgetown. I went to Georgetown, and with the idea that I would um, pursue some type of international business, international affairs. And while I was there, I realized a lot of other alternatives that haven't never even knew about. One of those was investment banking, and it was a time where the markets were really good. I had I had a good pulse, had a warm pulse, and somehow made my way into one of these positions right after graduating on Wall Street for a large investment bank. And uh, for the next 10 years, that's what I did. It was a lot of um, working on financing, raising capital for large corporations, working on mergers and acquisitions. And I did that in New York, focused on the US market, and then eventually moved to London and was working on the Europe, Middle East, and Africa markets. And the sector that I ended up specializing in was commercial real estate. Now, none of this was anything I would have thought of or focused on beforehand. It was just at the time, when I first joined, I focused on where is there the most work to do, and where is there the most need. And it turned out it was in number one, it was in financing. And then subsequently it was in real estate. And so I just followed into the areas where um, the most work was required, the most need was demanded. It's that thought process I mentioned before, which you alluded to at the beginning of your program, which was we're all focused on getting out and working as hard as possible, with the idea that the harder you work, the better the outcome is. And I did that for a long time, and the work was outrageous. The amount of hours I would put in on a regular basis. I look back on that, and it was just crazy. And there came a time, I think it was around 2015. I said, you know what, I had already been in London for 5 years at the time, and I was seeing that it was either settle down there, and that is going to be, I'm going to be a Europe guy. I'm going to focus on those markets. I'm going to focus on deals there, or I come back to the U.S. and try something else. And it was then that I decided, okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to relocate back to America, come back to New York, set up my base here, and then focus on the next thing. And the next thing is where this entrepreneurial path started for me. And it was in investing into these types of properties. I spend so much time watching and working on behalf of large private equity groups, REITs, institutional investors that were in this area, and watching them completely crush it. And I said, well, I want to do something similar. But uh, I did it the hard way, and I said, well, I'm not gonna join another outfit that's doing this. I'm gonna find partners, and I'll go out there, figure it out, and get it done. And uh, that's precisely what I did. And it was really, really hard. I wouldn't advise it, but I went out, found some really good partners. We for the first year, over the first year, acquired a large multifamily property, $20 million plus, 280 units, and then thereafter worked on other types of property. And in the past, it's been now almost 5 years now. I've been able to, as a general partner, acquire over 75 million of property. And if I were to do that again, I'd have a very different strategy, because the mentality that I had was, it was that same mentality from day one. Work really hard. Where's there a need? And then you just attack it and you fight until you figure it out.
Yeah.
And then you go to, where's the next hill? And you go charge up that one.
Yeah, that's you bring up a lot of really, I think, really key gold nuggets in that whole monologue, and one of them was you have no problem finding the work. I think the thing that you're looking for though is making sure that you're actually working towards what's needed. Like so many people just like spin their wheels and they work hard, but they're not necessarily like taking the biggest scoops. You know what I mean? Because like the substance of the value that they're doing is just not there. And I've seen people in a corporate environment, for example, that like they're kind of like they volunteer and they go, I can do that, like I can take care of that. And it's like that type of personality seems to do very well, because they're constantly trying to find what's needed, even though it's hard. Let's go get it. And it sounds like that's kind of what your mentality was. It's like, this is where the work is, and not be afraid to go where the work is. But too many times people want to work, but only on what they want to work on.
Yeah, there's two ways to approach it, and one is um, exactly right. It's where there is a need, you can stand out, you can perform and get recognized, hopefully. Um, and that was the thought process I had from day one. Yet when you're in an unstructured environment, there are needs everywhere. There are needs all over the place.
Right.
And now you have to be a lot more picky and a lot more prescribed in where you want to spend your time, because you can be fighting fires all around you all day and do nothing.
Yes.
So there it becomes very, very tricky, because the infrastructure isn't already in place to allow you to dive into, okay, this one particular silo, that's where I'm going to make a mark. Well, no, there's no, you have to create that infrastructure to begin with, and then focus on where your time is going to produce the biggest result.
That's
And
such a great point. And I ran into that. I was speaking with an entrepreneur at one of our local networking groups, and I was kind of saying something along these lines too, where it's like, there's kind of that person that views the world, they just kind of walk through life and they never really kind of turn on the magnifying glass or ask any questions. Those people don't necessarily see the world as opportunity. They just kind of react, and that's how they go through life. But then there's another, but once people kind of wake up to the world of opportunities, it can almost be a curse in a lot of ways, that everything becomes an opportunity. I mean, think about it. The computer that we're talking on could be a potential business opportunity. Like, there's a way you can make money selling computers. You can make money selling software. You can make money selling real estate. You can make money selling the plastic that's in the chair that I'm sitting on. I mean, it's just like there's these people have all contributing to the global economy in their own ways. And it's about, how can you figure out what you need to focus on, because there's certainly opportunity everywhere. And I find that like people want to be entrepreneurs, but don't necessarily have like a product or service that they want to sell yet, are usually in a really deadly position, because they're just trying to find like, ooh, what's hot? Like, what's a good idea? Instead of like just kind of leaning into what their strengths are, what's the value proposition that they can really bring forward. And I'm wondering if you have, any techniques or any thoughts that you've kind of thought about on those lines of like, how can you start to prioritize, this is something that's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck with the time and energy I'm investing into something.
Yeah, no, and you have to recognize first that everyone has already spent a significant amount of time building up some kind of expertise and building up certain competencies are that would set you apart from everyone else. And so you don't start at ground zero. You already start with certain skills
Right.
and certain arrows in your quiver. And then the question is, well, where are you going to take it from there? Because now you have a choice. You can use some of the skills you already have, and maybe you don't like the type of work or type of role that puts you in. You want to try something different. Okay, that's fair. You're always we should always be open to growing and developing in other areas, especially if you have a deep passion behind one of those. And the challenge though is you can't do everything. You can't develop in every area
Right.
because that defeats the purpose. And that's where teams come in and partners to help you in the areas that you aren't exceptional at. And so there are two themes here. Number one is um, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who came up with this idea that you develop proficiency in some type of subject matter after you've spent roughly 10,000 hours working on that. And from there, now you get to the point where you're really refining that skill and getting yourself really sharp and really capable of creating value in that area over more time, the more time that you spend on that. So that is an asset that you have that you certainly shouldn't overlook. And
Right.
then complementary to that idea, there is, I really like what Gay Hendricks put together in The Big Leap, in that there are certain, he calls them zones. There's the zone of incompetence. These are things you should never even touch. Then there's a zone of competence. All of us who are well-rounded can pick up the ball in a lot of different areas, but we're not great at it. We can get it done, but only with a lot of effort and with a lot of energy, and probably shouldn't be spending our time on that. We should be spending our time in the next zone, which is the zone of excellence. We're really, really competent at something. And that probably marries up well with this. Okay, I've gotten really proficient by spending at least 10,000 areas in this one subject or in this one skill or in this one market or whatever it is. That's certainly higher value time when you are the one carrying out that activity. But then there's something beyond that, which is the highest value for your time, and he calls that the zone of genius. And the
Mm.
more time that you spend on that, this is the area where you are just so incredibly gifted in this area that you don't you can do work there and you don't get tired. You don't you don't wear out. You produce extraordinary results that somebody else probably has to struggles through to mirror. And 1 hour of your time there is really paying dramatic dividends. Yet these are very, very specific and unique to everyone. And most of the time, especially if you're in an entrepreneurial environment, you got to wear a lot of different hats. So a lot of your time is then spent on these lower quality activities based on your unique skills and experiences. So you might be spending half your time doing activities in your zone of competence, maybe 30-40% in your zone of excellence, and very little in your, and maybe the other 10% is in your zone of incompetence. You're not spending any time in your zone of genius. And that's step number one, is to recognize, okay, how am I splitting up my activities every day, and how much of those are my highest value deliverables in terms of the use of my time. And if it's not present, or if it's very, very little, then that's step number one in reprioritizing what it is that you're doing versus what it is that you're outsourcing or that you bring on partners to do in coordination with you.
What's funny is you touch on an idea, I think that's kind of a unique way of looking at how people, like businesses, do this all the time with like kind of activity-based costing models, right, in accounting, which is more or less when you can kind of budget down to an activity level and assign different types of like overhead rates to those different buckets. I'm wondering if there's like a way, that you could do that with your own personal activities, right? So for example, with me, when I charge somewhere between $1,000 to $1,500 an hour when I'm doing a speaking event. However, I do some of the prep work. I'll do like some graphic design stuff for like a podcast cover art that's like significantly less valuable than $1,500 an hour, right? But that's because that's not necessarily in my zone of genius doing graphic design work. Something that would be my zone of genius would be when I'm speaking. But you don't really have you can't fill up your schedule with all of that yet, because you're still trying to manage these multiple hats.
Yes.
And I think as an early entrepreneur, I was like wanting everything that I wouldn't do an activity unless it was worth that $1,500 an hour rate, But I think to really bring that back to being real, it's like, yeah, I think that there is, though, your skill level and what is it worth for you to do it. And maybe my graphic design's only worth like $17 an hour or something.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then you always got to be asking yourself, is this something that I'm happy to do, given the the use of your time and the value that that's bringing to you? And it goes hand in hand with another challenge that I think you'd have in entrepreneuring. One of the most difficult challenges, which is we're perhaps you don't have the capital on hand to go ahead and outsource everything.
Yep.
And you don't have the revenues in your business in place to bring in partners to build that up. And so you want to do as much as you can yourself because you want to save costs.
Yep.
And there's two areas that you can, there's actually three areas you can focus on in any type of business to increase profitability. You can be focusing your time building revenue. You could be focusing your time to reduce costs, or you can be focusing your time to make your system more efficient. And the highest value area, which has no limit, is focusing on revenue, because there's no cap on that in theory.
Yeah, there's no bottom line without a top line, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And if you focus on that and you can move the needle there, then suddenly you can cover those costs and you can do more outsourcing and you can become more efficient and all these sorts of things. If you focus on your time on, well, I'm going to do as many of these other activities as I can because I just don't want to pay for it and I'm going to save money. Well, that does have a cost. Yes, you save money, but it has a cost in terms of your time, which is being allocated in areas that are not in your areas of excellence or genius, and which sacrifice the ability to be spent building revenue, which is probably the highest value area that you can focus your time on.
What do you think are good ways for entrepreneurs listening to this that some people get it, some people know what that zone of genius might be for them, but a lot of people probably early on might be like, I'd love to know what my zone of genius is so I can stop wasting my time with all these things that I'm stumbling through life not good at and figure out what I'm good at. Do you have any ideas of what you would do to find what that might be for you or for somebody?
To find what you're really good at. Well, I think this is a tricky one. I mean, of course, there's all sorts of, you look online, you look at different types of self-development books. There are all sorts of exercises that you can do to see, different types of personality tests, different types of the exercises you can do to see, oh, well, I actually am really good with people, or really good with selling, or really good at building, establishing rapport, or building. You can, of course, ask colleagues who know you very well to tell you in an unbiased way, well, look, this is what you're really good at, and this is what you're not good at. And the same with people who know you extremely well. But what's really tricky about this is that there's one element here that you're not going to see. In fact, as I think about some of these resources that I've gone through in the past, there's nothing that really highlights this. And it's that there's something there called your ego that will step in and try to answer these questions for you. And sometimes the answer that they give you is what you want to hear and not what you need to hear.
Hmm.
And you might say, well, look, I'm excellent at, I'm excellent at being a leader, or I'm an excellent manager, or I'm an excellent salesperson. I'm excellent one thing or the other. And maybe you're just okay, but this is what your identity to date has been defined as. And maybe it's not. Maybe you're excellent at something that's not as sexy. Maybe you're excellent at something that you don't like as much, but you can do that. You can fill that role with incredible efficiency, so much so that somebody else who doesn't have that will value that tremendously. And
Yeah.
so this is something where you really have to, you do that combination of things to say, okay, look, this is what I'm really good at. This is what deep down inside I know I'm good at, I'm not good at. And then let yourself free of your ego so you can recognize that um where it is that you really can shine. And the answer to that may not be something that you like to hear, but it certainly would give you some direction.
Yeah, and I think people also, maybe it's a nuance thing, but along those same lines, if they don't want to hear the answer of what they are really good at, I think there's a difference between like the sexiness of the idea of what they're doing versus like there's a difference between how good of this sounds really cool versus do you actually really enjoy that thing? So like some people might really enjoy the idea of something, but when they're actually doing it, they might not necessarily enjoy it so much. Like you see this with like just because in my industry where we're like, I'm doing a lot of speaking and a lot of people want to be like authors and writers, like they say they are authors, writers, and speakers, like they say that, but then when they actually have to go stand up in front of people day after day, like answer really hard questions, do all this kind of stuff consistently, they don't really enjoy it, but they like the idea of being on a stage and having these lights on there and kind of showcase them, but they're not necessarily as good at it as they think they are. And number two, they're not really enjoying it the way they thought they were going to enjoy it. And I think it's very well related to your strengths and how much you enjoy something. Does that kind of make sense?
It absolutely does. And I think that part of that is this ego factor that is subconsciously telling you that this sounds really sexy. This sounds really like this is where I need to be because it's in the spotlight, or whatever the case is. And maybe it's not. And it doesn't mean that if your area of strength is something that doesn't sound that appealing to you, that should be something to turn you off. That's why there are partners out
Right.
there that you can work with to get you where you want to be. And that's why, again, if you step back and think about what are you really trying to achieve, I think a lot of us are trying to achieve very similar things. You don't go into an entrepreneurial role to try to create a solution to a problem. At least, well, not perhaps you do, but without the idea that you're going to be wildly successful and it's going to be a very profitable endeavor and you're going to be able to derive a lot of wealth from that, right? Um, because that is the nature of that's the nature of business. You engage in it to generate profits, and those profits are what sustain you. And so, if you think about it in the context of, okay, I'm trying to I'm trying to get the biggest bang for my buck, for which is my time, and the success from that will be that I'm engaged in some activity that not only generates enough to sustain me, but to make me capable of living not just a comfortable life, but a life of financial security. And if it works really well, then I move into the realm of financial abundance. And now I can really, give a lot more, spend more time with charity, do whatever the more personally rewarding aspects of life are for you, because you have the means to really support. Now, you can get there if I would venture to say that if you're focused on your areas of strength that are valuable and you can plug that into a partnership or a business or a corporation or anything where there are other team members that are excellent in other areas that are necessary to make that whole system work efficiently, you're going to progress faster. You're going to get those financial results faster than if you're fighting to put yourself into the role where it sounds much better
Right.
and it satisfies your ego, but you're really not as extraordinary as you think, because your time will be spent making up for other shortfalls
Right.
that you're probably not seeing. And that's, I know that's a bold statement, and it may lead a lot of people to say, well, what, I I really wanted to do this. Well, think about what the end result should be at the end of the day. At the end of the day, should it be to really progress and make incredible strides towards your financial security and financial freedom? Or is it to be engaged in something that um, you have created a story for as this is where I need to be because I really like it and I want to be a star there?
Right. Tell me a little bit about, you have obviously multiple different partnerships and I'm sure various different, business models as well, especially just being a real estate investor and having seen lots of deals with different types of partnerships. Like, normally, what is it, the thing that you'd say is kind of your zone of genius that you bring to the table? And what are you usually looking for in a partner that can kind of offset some of your weaknesses?
Yeah, well, I'll share the same medicine that I just put out. I'll apply that to myself. And so I spent many years in an investment bank focusing on one of the areas was investment sales. And so we are mandated to sell a company or sell very large assets. Um, and so I would put together the marketing story for that and uh, pitch the story to investors or to potential acquirers. And um, that's one skill set. And then when I moved into the buy side to acquire assets myself, I it made it very easy to see the the what was real versus what was marketing. When I would look at opportunities that were being presented either by a broker or by an owner that was wanting to sell an asset, I could see through all that noise and get right down to the nuts and bolts of the transaction quite easily. So my strength is to be able to, so I'm a numbers guy. It's really to dig into a situation, understand the numbers, understand what's fact from fiction, understand what the risks are, and pick a value that makes sense for whatever it is that the investor, in this case it's myself, is trying to achieve. Now, what I am not very strong in is the um, the relationship building, the report building that somebody who's very good with sales can do. And so I've done that with competence in the past, but it's a lot of work for me. It it really I burn energy very fast doing that. So I found partners who were fantastic at that sort of thing, who love that. They love people. They love building relationships. They love having conversations for hours and hours on end. They love to dig in and understand the different parties that are involved. And so, in almost all cases, those are the types of partners that I've worked very well with because I'm perfectly happy to dig into the details and do the stuff that they would make their eyes glaze over. I
Right.
love that stuff. And meanwhile, they can help. develop that relationship with a seller, feed me the information that I need to say, well, okay, well, these are the areas really we ought to focus on for negotiating based on what you've mentioned. And we work very well together. And when I first started, my idea was, well, look, I've done this before. I should continue to do the same function. I should go out, build relationships, try to source opportunities directly. And I can do that, but I'm just not as efficient as spending my time, all of my time, trying to see through, time to do the diligence and see through what the holes in a story are. So being a storyteller, putting marketing together made me very efficient at uncovering things within the stories that sellers are presenting.
I think that's a really common business dynamic that you described as well. You've kind of got, people that I'd say trend towards an acute attention to detail, really analytical capability, people that can really, dig into all of the necessary weeds to be able to pick apart a deal, or in any kind of business, someone that's kind of got that analytical hat on. And then there's also that relationship, that kind of extroverted networking aspect, that power of who personality that comes into it as well. I've noticed that, it's not necessarily that the way those types of people solve problems is so much different too. And I think having that kind of yin and yang, that Shaq and Kobe from 2003, you know what I mean? It's just like that ability to kind of play off each other is really a powerful business dynamic, because, like there's so much value in either one of those. Having someone like, for me, I'm very much probably someone that you would describe like you would, like your partners would probably fall into, right? Like I love the idea of connecting with people, like just having long discussions, figuring out what their needs are, doing the negotiations, what's in it for both of us, how can we make this deal work, coming up with some creative strategies and things like that. Maybe discussing some possibilities and all that kind of stuff. But then where my weakness falls is, it's like when we're having to pick apart something to an excruciating level of detail, that typically is where deals can be made or lost into that level that I might have overlooked, because I'm like really excited to get it done, to get it moving very quickly, and having someone that can slow me down and really help emphasize some of the more important points is like someone that I'm looking for. And I find seems to be a very common business dynamic. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are almost diametrically opposed roles: the analytical person and the relationship and report salesperson. And there are other roles as well. There's the creative types that are excellent for putting together marketing campaigns, and it depends on what type of business that you're talking about. And then there's the management side. There's the process slash management, which is again, it depends on what the business is, but that's a central role. That's the operations person that what they're doing is trying to increase efficiency and trying to manage different people to get the best results. And that four very different roles on a team. And it really depends on what it is that your venture is. And some of them you may not need them. You definitely need sales and everything. But the other roles are a function of really what it is that you're doing. And it- the more you can stick to your area of expertise, your zone of genius, where you really shine, where you don't burn any calories doing the hard work and creating solutions, the more you're able to push forward whatever it is, that initiative that you're doing. And the key then is, if you need one or more of these other areas, to have the right person there, so that now you have all four wheels moving and not one of them. And now if you have them all moving with the same gusto, now you pick up speed and you win.
Yeah, I've noticed too, just, on a personal level, it seems like a lot of friendships tend to be that when you have those abilities to, offset each other. Like a lot of my friends tend to be more introverted, or people that kind of, they don't they're not necessarily as obnoxious, but they're very like loyal and they're very committed, and they're just, um, where like somebody else, like they're looking for people that, like, if they sat in a room with people just like themselves, then there won't be a lot of talking going on. It would just be kind of awkward. So they're looking for a friend like me that's like always got something going on. It's just things are always moving. So it's just like I've seen that at a personal level and at a business level, it's just about finding that nice balance of relationships, like with spouses too. You can usually tell, that the spouse that talks a lot and then the spouse that doesn't, right? It's just like it seems like there are a lot of really good balances, and you can apply that in many different ways of having a spouse or a friend or even a business partner in ways that they can complement your weaknesses, and kind of vice versa.
Yeah, everything in life is about relationships, and um, and having and having those relationships in your life and having that variety um, is really what it's all about. And it's true. I think everyone can just recognize it from personal experience. There are very different types of personalities out there, and each one is suited and gifted and fits very well into its own particular situation. There's very few people that are. I'm not even sure if it's possible where you're great at everything. That's why whether it's for a business venture, having the right partners, whether it's for in your personal life, having the right combination of people to really have an enjoyable time, enjoy everybody else's company, see things in different points of view. This is all very high value, and it all begins with knowing who you are, and what are you really good at,
Yep.
and where do you need help? Because that's another thing. We all need help. Everybody needs help with something. We're not perfect in everything, and we're always working on something. However, if you're going to spend time to develop yourself, that is an important question. Are you going to spend time to work on your weaknesses and improve those? Are you going to spend time strengthening the area where you're already excellent at something? Are you going to do a little bit of both? Now, there's different philosophies around that, but if you're already really strong in something and you improve that area, the value you create it becomes even greater.
Right. I
And
I, I completely agree with that. And there's so many, it's a shame because I know a lot of feedback circles with friendships with parents and with corporate organizations and leadership organizations. There's so much feedback that revolves around trying to fix your weaknesses, trying to like work on these things that you suck at. These are just essential, in our line of work or whatever the feedback mechanism typically is. And there's just such little conversation around how do we get this person in a place where they just thrive, and let's just dump gasoline on what they're great at and allow them to really excel. And unfortunately, a lot of people, I don't know if they view the world the same way you and I do, where there is a right place. And some organizations, like you said, maybe you don't have the opportunity to find that role, and that's on you as to kind of find that profession or that career path or that business that's going to be able to complement that strength.
yeah, yeah, it's for many many years. Well, it all started back in the academy. The focus was you need to improve in all areas.
Yep.
And there is truth to that, to the extent that, well, you want to be well rounded. Um, this is part of your developmental years. And then you move on into life. And there comes a point after which, okay, well, look, I have the tools that I need to succeed and to operate and to function well. And now we need to develop some competitive advantages in certain areas to really stand out. And I think there's a shift that happens over time where you will get more value from focusing on certain areas where you want to become um, exceptional rather than every area and be balanced. And I had the mentality of being balanced and develop in all areas that it took me a long time to pull away from. Um, but that's I guess it goes hand in hand with everything else that we've been mentioning here. And
Yep.
there's this other thing I wanted to bring up, which uh, ties the skill that you have with your time to your financial reward. And one of my classmates, Alonzo Ford, he we were discussing this topic one day, and he mentioned this metric. He just invented it on the spot, and it's incremental return on time invested, IROTI. And it doesn't exist anywhere. He just made it up, I believe. And what this means is that, okay, if we're already stretched thin in terms of our responsibilities, in terms of the hours that we've um, got available and what we need to do with them, if we're going to put our attention and time into something else, or we're going to free up time from one area and then devote it somewhere else, where should you spend that extra hour? Or where should you spend that extra day or that extra week or whatever it is? And this was an excellent metric, I thought, because you want to spend that hour on the area that's going to get you the biggest return for that time, the biggest incremental return on your time. And so it all ties back together. If you're going to free up an hour of time from outsourcing something, and you're going to transition that hour from your zone of competence to your zone of genius, well, what activity is that? And where can you apply that, practically speaking, so that you actually get a return from it? Because I know from a practical point of view, it could make sense and say, hey, look, I'm excellent at whatever, at marketing. Okay, well, who needs marketing? I'm not really using it in what I'm doing right now, or I'm only using it a little bit. Okay, well, that's the thing to be thinking about. If that's your zone of genius, or some specific element of that, whatever it is, I don't know. You can figure that out. If that's your zone of genius, and you're going to spend extra time on some activity, find the key is who needs it, and because the person that needs that is going to provide you with the most return for your skill.
Yeah, that's kind of comes back to the idea of having that unlimited ceiling with revenue when you're using that as your target. If you can put it's just the business principle of specialization, right? It's about focusing on the thing that's going to get you the most bang for your buck with that time. I love that idea. We talked about that last time we spoke, and I think that idea of looking at time invested and getting the best return for your time is something that people can use when making decisions between, is this a better idea to start a business, or should I like not quit my job? Because a lot of times entrepreneurs, like I think I shared with you an example last time, entrepreneurs or people will quit their job, start a business, and make significantly less money and work significantly harder just so they have this glamorous title of the entrepreneur. I think that's just silly. It's just a poor business decision. And it comes back to is the ego talking, right? But if you have a metric like that, like looking at the amount of time you're investing into something and get that amount of money you can get per hour, then you can start to analyze it like you would any other type of business decision. Like, yeah, I'm going to spend time marketing now. Okay, there's no marketing work for me to do. Let's keep that revenue growth in mind. Who could use this skill? Who's not good at this? And how
Yes.
can I position it there, right?
Yes, because that's okay. You're exactly right. You want to spend your time where you get the biggest bang for the buck. And like we were mentioning before, well, you could spend your time developing in other areas. It's going to take a long time for that other area for you to become proficient enough in that other area where somebody's going to say, well, I actually very highly value that.
Mm-hmm.
If you are working on behalf of a side gig, or you're working for someone else, and if you're working for yourself, well, a lot of times the center of everything when it comes to business is you got to sell some type of service or a product so that you can generate revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your product is your incredible skill at marketing, well, then there's a few other there's a few other legs of the stool that are necessary, but you can really put that to work in an incredible way if you find the right people that need that talent to get a product to market or get a service to market. And
Right.
so that's the thinking about where that is, touching base with all your relationships and your network to find that need. And that a lot of times it's really about timing, but it's also about the right people. This is where things come together, and this is where ideas form. And if you're focused on where where you can provide the most value for your time based on you, well, I think that's probably where you should spend your time if you want to get the best return for it.
Right. Yeah. This was wow. This was, an epic conversation. I really appreciate there's so many ways we could keep going with this, but I know I think you've got a date with the wife this evening is
Oh
what you
yes.
mentioned. Yeah. You got to make sure you're taking care of your Friday night plans. But this was an outstanding conversation. I know you're working on a program, or there were some courses, just kind of along this line of thought. I was wondering, have you made any progress with that, or what's that look like?
Oh yeah, we spoke um, a little over a month ago, actually. Yeah, that was I just finished this morning, and it was this was
Great timing.
this was like climbing a mountain in a way, in that um, it, basically, okay, we're going back to the time that you spend developing areas. I had actually logged and counted all my hours over time, and I've spent over 35,000 hours working in the area of investments, whether it's investment analysis, whether it's working on acquisitions or sales or financing of assets and businesses. And unfortunately, I most of that I don't use anymore because I'm not employed in a function that needs it. And having developed this expertise and seeing it potentially perish over time from not using it is something that really burned me. And so once this whole situation this year with lockdowns and COVID and everything else happened, I said, okay, well, I can't really go anywhere, and I have a little bit of extra time. Let me try to put some of this knowledge down into some format that I could share. And so I started on a very what I thought was a very sensible idea to put a program together, which I later cursed because of the amount of time and effort that it took to do. But I've gotten now to a point where several solid months of work in, I've got a course ready, and it's designed in a very particular way. It's not to go out and buy assets and that sort of thing. It's designed for someone who is in a very demanding position, very demanding role or occupation, job, what have you, where they don't have the time or the energy or the background to look at and invest in commercial real estate, but they like that sector and they understand some of the benefits, but they just don't have the role that they're in currently does not afford them the opportunity to dig in and allocate capital to that area. And so the program that I have, the course that I put together, is designed to build up the foundations and the concepts and the understanding of the asset class and valuations. And more important than anything, it's my expertise, which is how do you make your way through the sea of investments that are available out there in terms of private investing into different types of commercial real estate, where you're not familiar enough to differentiate what is good versus what's mediocre versus what you need to stay away from. And
Right.
unfortunately, we have some great marketers out there in that sector, and they present investment opportunities in a way where everyone looks incredible. Everyone looks great. But out of 10 deals that are going to make 15% or more, half of them are not. In fact, they may do very, very poorly. and maybe one may even wipe out. And there's only one that's going to really exceed that target. So when you're really busy, and I remember I was in this position, and I had wanted to do some of these investments on the side, and it's impossible for me. You just don't have the time, and you don't have the guidance, and you don't have the formula to really figure that out. So that's what I put together, and it's now finally complete. So I can upload it, and I can move on to next to the next thing.
So how can people get a hold of that, or is it going to become available soon, or what's that look like?
Well, once it's up, what I can do is I can send you like a link or some information on that, because I'm still going back to strengths, and I'm not a digital marketer, and so, this is not what I can do. So it's, but I think by next week,
Maybe I'll help you with some of that.
yeah, but by next week there will be something ready, and I don't know how you do these, but I can give you a link, or I can give you a page.
Yeah, give us a link. We'll throw that in the show notes. So if people are listening, and just to reiterate on that, that is a problem, especially for people getting into the space. Like, it is hard to evaluate these deals, and like understand, like, well, if it's on the market, then how come nobody else has bought it? It's like, is this a really good deal? And navigating that language. And coming from someone like you, West Point graduate, you got an MBA from Georgetown, or master's degree from Georgetown. You've got years of experience on Wall Street as an investment banker, several, tens of millions of dollars assets under management in commercial real estate. It's just, you are the expert in this way in so many ways, and being able to capture just a sliver of that information so that people can, the busy people, so many entrepreneurs reach out to me and they just say, I'm kind of financially illiterate. They'll make money in the business, but then they don't know what to do with it in their personal finance. When they do start building up a pool of cash, they don't know how to maybe divest into the right things. It's just really a mess with a lot of people that work with me as well. And I think, with someone with your experience getting into the commercial real estate section, or someone that might be a high income person, or someone that just might not find it terribly interesting to spend hours meticulously picking apart commercial real estate projects, this could be an awesome opportunity for them. So yeah, dude, if you send us over a link, I'd be more than happy to throw that in the show notes so people can take a look at what you have to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to be able to help anyone that's in that position. And I think it's a particularly timely now, because the most risky I'm more focused on risk management than on returns any day. And this is a particularly um, risky time, because where are we in the markets right now, right?
Right.
Are we still at the end of a very long up cycle that is just going through some turbulence? Are we in a transitional point in time? Are we on our way towards a recession? Uh, these are risky times, yet if you look in the market, there is no change in the activity of investments that show up. I mean, I get hundreds of emails every day with different investment opportunities. There's no change in the backdrop. But if you aren't careful, um, and you pull the trigger on something, it hopefully, I really hope that it works out. But you must be prudent, because there's a high likelihood that it may not, given just where we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's an art. And I think that that's really something that our listeners can find valuable. Is there a way you'd like them to get in touch with you on a one-on-one basis, maybe, or if they want to reach out, or you just want to stick with the link for now, or if people want to follow along on social media at all, anything else?
Sure. I will share some of that information. Again, I'm to reiterate, marketing is not my strength. And so my social media profile is very poor. And it's gone from being non-existent to something's there. And I hope to improve that. But I'll come back to you for sure. I'm very open, and I want to share knowledge. And I want people to make good decisions so that they can progress on their journey. Because the worst thing is you work so hard to build up your nest egg, and then you take a wrong turn, you make a mistake, somebody sells very hard, and you go into the wrong thing, and now you beat yourself up about it, and it puts you a step back,
Yep.
or more. And so I don't like that, and I want to help as much as possible to develop awareness. But I will share that with you, and perhaps you can do something with that and link it some way. I
Yep.
just don't have the best handles and the best
I think the fact
stuff.
that you don't have the best social media marketing is exact proof of why people probably should take you seriously in this program. Like, you're spending your time, 100% in investing in the financial sector, and like being able to master that and create this program. It's like sometimes you get all the hype, but you don't get all the good stuff. It reminds me of when we were in El Paso and we're looking for the best taco joint, was always the one that looked the ratchetest. Like, these people know how to make tacos. If this place is like just a complete, like, if it's like some light blue painted building or something like that like you would never go into, best tacos were always there. Because it's like the marketing sometimes is just fluff, and it's really, you want people that are spending their time on the craft. I don't know, just not to compare you to a taco joint, but I think that the fact that you're not spending your time marketing per se, but spending a lot of time, making sure the quality of this is just carried through to a meticulous level, just is, I think, all the more reason why you would be someone that I would look at, right away.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And It's been a real pleasure, Aaron. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. I'll send you whatever information you need, and happy to be available and add value in the future.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Diaz. Once again, guys, this is Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. You can follow us on Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment, 5-star review, share this with your friends. Help us get that out there so that other people can participate in some of these discussions, learn something. And also, reach out to Mr. Diaz over here if you guys have any questions in the financial world. We're going to put all that information in the show notes. You can also listen to this episode at aaronjarmstrong.com/podcast, where you'll see Ludwig Diaz, in his background and bio as well. So thank you so much. Be somebody.